You know that feeling, right? You make some tiny little mistake in a crowded room, and bam, it feels like every single eye is just locked right on you. Well, that sinking feeling, it actually has a name. And in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and figure out exactly why it happens and, more importantly, what the research says about it.
So let's start right there, with that very specific, very human moment of just intense self-consciousness. What is really going on in our brains when we feel like all eyes are on us?
I mean, you know the one. You mispronounce a word, you trip over absolutely nothing, or maybe you just feel a little out of place. It's this universal feeling, right? That hot flush of embarrassment. But what's really happening inside our heads in that moment? Okay, picture this. You're walking into a big meeting. You look down, and you see you've spilled a tiny drop of coffee on your white shirt. Now to you, that little stain feels like a giant, flashing neon sign just screaming clumsy to the entire world.
Or maybe you just stumble on the sidewalk. For that split second, it feels like time slows down, and you can almost feel the weight of dozens of judging eyes. But are they really looking? The answer might actually surprise you.
So that intense feeling of being under a microscope? Well, it has a name, and it's a totally fascinating psychological phenomenon that, believe it or not, affects all of us.
And here it is, the spotlight effect. It's our tendency to drastically overestimate how much other people notice our appearance or our actions. We feel like we're on a stage, under this harsh, bright spotlight, when in reality, everyone else is the star of their own show. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? We are the main character in our own story, and because of that, we often forget that we're just a background character in pretty much everyone else's.
Now, this idea isn't new. It's actually built on decades of research. Way back in 1980, there was this wild study where people were told they had a fake facial scar. They felt like everyone was treating them differently. But here's the twist. The scar was secretly removed before they even talked to anyone. Their own self-consciousness created the entire experience. And all this research eventually led to the term spotlight effect being officially coined in 1999.
So how did researchers prove this bias in a really concrete way? Well, they did it with one of the most famous experiments in social psychology, the T-shirt test.
The setup was simple, but honestly, it was brilliant. Researchers had a student put on a seriously embarrassing T-shirt, we're talking Barry Manilow here, and then walk into a room full of their peers. Afterward, they just had to guess what percentage of people in the room noticed their shirt. So, what do you think they guessed? 50%? 75%?
And the results? Whoa, they're striking. The participants guessed that around 50%, half the people in the room noticed their shirt, but the reality, fewer than 23% actually did. They overestimated the attention on them by more than double. That spotlight we feel, it's pretty much all in our heads.
And what's really interesting here is that this isn't just about negative stuff. The same studies found we also overestimate how much people notice our positive attributes, like our cool new shoes, or that brilliant idea we shared in a meeting. We think our moments, the good and the bad, are way more memorable to others than they actually are. All right, so we know the spotlight effect is real. But what's the psychological mechanism behind it all? Why do our brains consistently overestimate how much other people are paying attention to us?
Well, it comes down to a cognitive bias called anchoring and adjustment. Let me put it this way. If I ask you to guess the price of a bottle of wine and I first mention a ridiculously expensive bottle, you're probably going to guess a higher price than if I had mentioned a cheap one first. That first piece of information, the anchor, totally influences your judgment.
So here's how that applies to the spotlight effect. Our anchor is our own intense first-person experience. That coffee stain on our shirt feels huge to us. That's the anchor. Then we try to adjust our perspective to guess what others see. But we just don't adjust nearly enough because we can't escape how important it feels to us.
Look, this isn't just some quirky mental habit. The spotlight effect has real, tangible consequences, from our social lives all the way to our professional performance.
For people with social anxiety, for example, the spotlight effect can be a huge factor, making them feel like they're constantly being scrutinized. For athletes, the belief that every little mistake is being watched can lead directly to performance anxiety. And get this, in our digital age, new research shows that getting a lot of online attention can actually make the spotlight effect worse in our offline lives.
But here's the good news. We are not powerless against this bias. Research actually points to concrete ways we can learn to dim that internal spotlight and start seeing the world a little more accurately.
Here are 2 really powerful research-backed strategies you can try. First, when you're worried about something coming up, try to visualize it from a third-person perspective, like you're watching a movie of yourself.
This simple shift can dramatically reduce that feeling of being judged. And second, even just a few minutes of mindfulness meditation can help loosen that tight, self-centered focus that really fuels the spotlight.
So at the end of the day, the key takeaway is this. That harsh spotlight you feel, it's mostly an illusion. Most people are way too busy worrying about their own spotlight to even notice yours. So knowing this, what might you do differently? What chances will you take? The stage is yours, and it turns out the audience is a lot smaller and a whole lot less critical than you think.